The seat had been empty for 300 cycles. It sat in the 47th row of the Grand Amphitheater aboard Nexus Station, a diplomatic hub the size of a small moon that floated in the dead space between two old stars. The amphitheater held 4,217 seats, one for every known sentient species in the galaxy, and every single one was occupied, except for that one chair in the 47th row. It was marked with a simple label in Galactic Common Script: Sol 3 Primates, Earth. Nobody talked about it. Nobody cared. It was a footnote in a very long book, and the galaxy had more important things to worry about. Counselor Draven Yoth had walked past that empty seat 1,000 times in his 60 cycles of service. He was a tall, armored insectoid from the Keyrath Collective, with 6 limbs, compound eyes the color of dark amber, and a voice that carried across rooms without effort. He was old by Keyrath standards, patient by nature, and tired of politics by choice. But he kept showing up because someone had to keep the younger species from doing something stupid. On the morning everything changed, Yoth was sitting through a long and boring debate about shipping lanes in the Andromeda Corridor. 2 mid-tier species were arguing over who had the right to charge tolls on a hyperspace route that neither of them had built. Yoth had heard the same argument 6 times in 30 cycles. He was fairly sure the route would outlast both civilizations. His junior analyst, a small nervous creature named Tyvos, approached from the side aisle. Tyvos was a Velic, a species that resembled a cross between a lizard and a house cat, and he had the unfortunate habit of blinking too fast when he was worried. He was blinking very fast now. "Counselor Yoth," Tyvos whispered, "I need to speak with you. It is urgent." Yoth glanced down at him. "Define urgent." "Sol 3 primates have developed faster than light travel." It was not unusual. Dozens of primitive species stumbled onto crude warp technology every century. Most of them burned through their resources and collapsed within a generation. He had seen it happen so many times it barely registered anymore. "When?" he asked. "That is the problem, Counselor. They achieved it approximately 40 cycles ago." Yoth went very still. 40 cycles. That was not a small error. That was not a missed report or a delayed filing. That was a complete and total failure of galactic observation. For 40 years, a species had been flying between stars, and nobody in the entire council had noticed. "How is that possible?" Yoth asked quietly. The Vethrani were responsible for monitoring that sector. Their last observation report on Sol 3 was filed 312 cycles ago. It classified the species as pre-contact and violent. No follow-up was ever ordered. "And in the time since then?" Tyvos blinked rapidly. "They have colonies, Counselor. At least 19 confirmed star systems, shipyards, defense platforms, a full military fleet." Yoth said nothing for a very long time. The debate about shipping lanes continued around him, but he no longer heard any of it. He was thinking about what it meant when a species built a military fleet in secret, in the dark, without anyone watching. He was thinking about what kind of species would choose to do that instead of making contact. He stood up from his seat and walked out of the amphitheater without a word. Tyvos hurried after him. Within 3 hours, Yoth had assembled a small observation fleet. He filed the mission under a routine classification to avoid attention, and set course for the Sol system personally. He wanted to see this with his own eyes before the rest of the council turned it into a political circus. On the other side of the galaxy, on a small blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star, a man named Sam Cortez was sitting on the back porch of his house in rural Virginia, watching the sky turn orange and pink as the sun went down. He was 54 years old, broad across the shoulders, with gray creeping into his dark hair, and deep lines around his eyes, from years of squinting at instrument panels in low light. He had a glass of iced tea on the railing and a dog named Biscuit sleeping at his feet, and he was perfectly content to stay exactly where he was for the rest of his natural life. Sam had served 22 years in the United States Space Command. He had flown the first manned mission to Europa, walked on the frozen surface, and looked up at Jupiter hanging in the black sky like a painting nobody would ever believe. He had led the classified deep-range expedition beyond the Oort cloud, the one that officially never happened, the one that proved humanity was not alone in the universe. His co-pilot on that mission had been a sharp-witted engineer named Katie Dunn, and she still called him every Sunday evening like clockwork. He had retired 3 years ago. He had earned it. He wanted nothing more than quiet evenings and a dog that did not ask questions. His phone rang. He almost did not answer it. The number was blocked, and blocked numbers usually meant someone trying to sell him something. But something in his gut told him to pick it up. The same instinct that had saved his life twice in deep space. "Cortez," he said. "Captain Cortez, this is Colonel Beckett at Space Command. I need you to pack a bag. A car will be at your house in 90 minutes. Sam looked at his iced tea. He looked at the sunset. "I am retired, Colonel." "I know that, sir. But something is coming, and General Foley has asked for you by name. You and Katie Dunn." Sam felt a cold thread pull through his chest. Aaron Foley was not the kind of man who called retired pilots back to duty for small things. Foley ran the Exo-Diplomatic Corps, the most classified branch of the government, the one that dealt with the truth about what was out there beyond the solar system. "What is coming?" Sam asked. "We are not sure yet, sir. But it is big, and it is headed straight for us." Sam closed his eyes. He had spent 30 years preparing for this moment, first as a pilot, then as a mission commander, then as one of the handful of people on Earth who knew the full scope of what humanity had been building in secret. He had hoped it would not come in his lifetime. He had hoped someone younger and sharper and less tired would be the one to answer the call. But it was his phone that had rung. 90 minutes, he said. "I will be ready." He hung up, finished his iced tea, and scratched Biscuit behind the ears. "Hold down the fort," he told the dog. Then he went inside to pack. Somewhere above him, past the clouds and the atmosphere and the thin shell of satellites that circled the Earth, a fleet of alien ships was dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. They carried diplomats and analysts and officers who believed they were about to observe a primitive civilization that had barely learned to fly. They had no idea what they were walking into. And humanity, for the first time in its history, was ready. 6 months after the vote, the galaxy was a different place. Not dramatically different, not overnight, because civilizations that had existed for thousands of years did not change direction like a small boat in a river. But the current had shifted. Everyone could feel it. The old order, the comfortable arrangement where a handful of powerful species made the decisions and everyone else quietly obeyed, had cracked. And the crack had started with a man sitting down in an empty chair and refusing to apologize for it. The Vethrani Dominion was hurting. Not militarily, their fleet was still the largest in the galaxy, and nobody was foolish enough to challenge that directly. But politically, they were bleeding. The coalition that had formed around humanity during the council vote had not dissolved after the session ended. Small and mid-tier species that had spent centuries swallowing their grievances were now talking to each other openly, comparing notes, discovering that they had all been subjected to the same exploitative treaties, the same rigged trade agreements, the same quiet threats delivered in diplomatic language. Ambassador Drissavel had been recalled by her own government. The official reason was a routine rotation of diplomatic staff. The real reason was that she had stood in front of the entire galaxy and threatened economic sanctions against species that voted with humanity, and the threat had not worked. In the world of Vethrani politics, failure was not forgiven. Her replacement was a younger diplomat named Sorrel Kin, who spoke less and listened more, and who understood that the old way of doing things was no longer the only option. The loose alliance of smaller species had given itself a name, the Compact of Free Worlds. It was not a power block. It was, at least officially, a cooperative agreement focused on trade, mutual aid, and shared defense planning. 23 species had signed the founding charter, with more expressing interest every week. Earth was its unofficial anchor, the largest and most capable member. But Sam Cortez had insisted from the beginning that humanity would not lead it. "The moment we put ourselves at the top," Sam told General Foley during a secure call from the Nexus, "we become exactly what we stood against. This has to be a partnership of equals, or it means nothing." Foley, practical as always, had agreed on the condition that humanity's military assets remained under independent command. Partners, yes, but we keep our own keys. Sam had no argument with that. Life on the Nexus station had changed for the human delegation. What had started as a team of 4 had grown into a permanent mission of 36 people, including diplomats, analysts, security personnel, and a small but dedicated cultural affairs team that spent most of its time explaining human idioms to confused aliens. Ethan Cole had been appointed as Earth's permanent cultural liaison, a role that suited him perfectly. His ability to read alien body language had become legendary among the diplomatic community. He could tell when a Vethrani negotiator was bluffing by the micro-movements of their neck scales. He could sense a Kirath delegate's genuine position by the rhythm of their mandible clicks. He was quiet, unassuming, and absolutely invaluable. Commander Lisa Vance had taken charge of the human security detachment at the station. She ran a tight operation, 12 personnel who maintained a constant but low-key presence around the human embassy wing. More importantly, she had established joint training exercises with the Kirath military, the first interspecies defense cooperation that humans had ever participated in. The Kirath soldiers respected her because she trained alongside them instead of just giving orders. The first time she outperformed a Kirath combat specialist in a zero-gravity obstacle course, the story spread through the station in less than a day. Counselor Yoth watched all of this with careful attention. He had thrown his support behind humanity during the vote, a decision that had earned him both praise and suspicion within his own government. The Kirath were a cautious people. They did not like surprises, and humanity was the biggest surprise the galaxy had delivered in living memory. But Yoth was not worried about what humanity was doing. He was worried about what humanity was capable of doing. In the weeks after the vote, he had quietly assigned Tyvos to conduct a deep review of every piece of human history that the Council's archives contained. The original observation reports, the intercepted broadcasts, the decoded transmissions, all of it. What came back was not comforting. Humans had been at war with each other for their entire recorded history. Not occasional conflicts, not border disputes, but generation after generation of organized industrial-scale violence that would have destroyed most species 10 times over. They had developed weapons capable of ending all life on their planet and had come within minutes of using them more than once. They had poisoned their own oceans, burned their own forests, and driven thousands of their fellow species to extinction. And then, somehow, they had survived all of it. They had not just survived, they had taken the same relentless, aggressive energy that had driven their wars and turned it outward, into space, into technology, into building a civilization that had gone from a single fragile planet to a multi-system power in less than 2 generations. Tyvos delivered his final analysis to Yoth in a private meeting room overlooking the station's main observation deck. "They are not like us, Counselor," Tyvos said. "They are not like any species in our records. Every other civilization in the galaxy, when faced with a challenge that seemed impossible, either adapted, retreated, or died. Humans do something else entirely. When they face something they cannot overcome, they become angry. And then they find a way to overcome it anyway, often at a cost that any rational species would consider unacceptable. You make them sound irrational, Yoth said. No, counselor. I make them sound unstoppable. There is a difference. Back on Earth, the world was adjusting to its new reality. The existence of alien life had been publicly disclosed 2 months after the council vote in a carefully managed announcement that had been planned for years. There had been panic, of course. There had been protests, celebrations, conspiracy theories, religious crises, and a brief but intense stock market crash. But humanity had done what it always did. It absorbed the shock, argued about it loudly, and then got back to work. General Foley briefed the United Nations Security Council in a closed session. He reported that humanity's strategic position was stronger than any of their models had predicted. The fleet was growing. Colony worlds were thriving. The new trade agreements with compact member species were generating economic benefits that had not been expected for another decade. We are ahead of schedule, Foley said. The Vethrani still have the largest military force in the galaxy, and they have long memories. They will not forget what happened in that amphitheater. Katie Dunn had returned to Earth to oversee a new generation of deep space exploration vessels. She had thrown herself into the work with her usual intensity, designing engines that were faster, more efficient, and more powerful than anything humanity had built before. She called Sam on a Sunday evening, as always. You know they are already writing songs about us, she said. The Aresi have some kind of harmonic tradition. Apparently there is a new composition. Ethan translated the title. It is called The Species That Would Not Kneel. Sam was quiet for a moment. He was sitting on his porch in Virginia again, the same porch where he had answered the phone call that had changed his life. The sunset was painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Let them sing, he said. You are not even a little bit flattered? I am a lot tired, Katie, but if it helps them stand a little taller, they can sing whatever they want. Katie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You did good, Sam. You know that, right? He did not answer right away. He was thinking about the Novari delegate who had stood up in the amphitheater, trembling and afraid, and had spoken anyway. He was thinking about all the other small, quiet species who had stood after her, finding their voices for the first time in centuries. He was thinking about the fact that humanity had not won anything in that chamber. What they had done was something harder and more important. They had given other people the courage to win for themselves. We are just getting started, he said. On the Nexus, the station's lights dimmed into their night cycle. Counselor Yoth sat alone on the observation deck, staring out at the stars through a window the size of a football field. The galaxy stretched before him, billions of points of light, each one a sun, each sun possibly home to a world, each world possibly home to a people with their own hopes and fears and songs. Tyvos approached quietly and stood beside him. Do you regret it, Counselor? Tyvos asked, supporting their admission. Yoth was silent for a long time. The stars turned slowly beyond the glass. No, he said at last. I do not regret it. They have brought something to this galaxy that we did not know we were missing. Honesty, defiance, the willingness to stand up and say what everyone else was thinking, but was too afraid to say. Then what troubles you? Tyvos asked. Yoth turned his amber eyes toward his assistant. They were old eyes. Eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, that had watched the slow, grinding machinery of galactic politics for 60 cycles. I have studied them very carefully, Tyvos. Their entire history, every war, every disaster, every crisis, and I have noticed a pattern that no one else seems to see. When every other species in this galaxy faced a challenge they could not overcome, they found a way to live with it. They accepted their limits. They made peace with what was possible. Humans do not do this. When humans face the impossible, they do not accept it. They do not make peace. They get angry. And then, against all logic and reason, they win. Tyvos considered this. Is that not a good thing? They are on our side. Yoth looked back at the stars. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, old and tired and knowing. That is precisely what terrifies me, Tyvos. Because the day they decide they are not on our side, there is nothing in this galaxy that will stop them. Nothing. The observation deck was quiet. The station hummed softly around them. The sound of 4,000 civilizations sleeping, dreaming, and wondering what tomorrow would bring. Outside, the stars burned on, ancient and indifferent. And somewhere, on a small blue world in the outer arm of the Orion Spur, a man sat on his porch with his dog and watched the last light fade from the sky. And he smiled, because humanity was just getting started, and the universe had no idea what was coming next. The Nexus Station was the largest structure Sam Cortez had ever seen. It hung in the void between two dying stars, a sphere of metal and light the size of Earth's moon, covered in docking towers and communication arrays and observation platforms that sparkled like a city seen from orbit. Thousands of ships moved around it in layered traffic patterns, arriving and departing from every direction, each one belonging to a different species, a different world, a different way of being alive. It was beautiful in a way that made Sam's chest ache. Not because it was perfect, but because it was proof that the universe was full of people trying, however badly, to get along. The ESV Resolute approached the station slowly. She was a medium-sized cruiser, deliberately modest in appearance, with smooth gray plating and only a few visible weapons ports. She looked like a ship that was trying not to be noticed. What the Council's scanners could not detect were the classified sensor arrays hidden beneath her hull, systems that were quietly mapping the station's entire defensive grid, cataloging every weapon placement, shield generator, and structural weakness in real time. Sam stood on the bridge with Katie, Ethan, and Lisa. None of them spoke. They just stared through the forward windows at the Nexus and tried to understand that they were the first humans in history to see it. That is a lot of ships, Lisa Vance said finally. She was tall, dark-haired, and had the kind of calm focus that made her terrifying in a cockpit. She was already counting weapon platforms. 4,000 species, Ethan Cole said softly, adjusting his glasses. 4,000 ways of seeing the universe, all in one place. He sounded almost reverent. We are not tourists. They were assigned a docking berth on the station's diplomatic ring and escorted by a pair of Keyrath security officers to the Grand Amphitheater. The corridors were wide enough to accommodate species of every size, from creatures smaller than a house cat to beings that had to bend double to fit through doorways. The air carried a dozen different chemical signatures, filtered and balanced to keep everyone alive. The walls displayed scrolling text in hundreds of languages. It was overwhelming and humbling, and exactly the kind of place that was designed to make newcomers feel small. Sam did not feel small. He felt ready. The amphitheater was enormous. Rows upon rows of seats rose in concentric rings around a central platform, each section designed for the physical requirements of its occupant species. Thousands of delegates were already seated, watching, whispering, clicking, humming and vibrating in their own ways. The sound of 4,000 civilizations talking at once was like standing inside a living machine. Sam walked down the center aisle. Katie was at his right shoulder. Ethan and Lisa were 2 steps behind. Every eye, sensor, and antenna in the room followed them. The humans moved with quiet confidence, their footsteps steady on the polished floor. They did not hurry. They did not hesitate. Sam reached the 47th row. He found the chair marked Sol 3 Primates. He looked at it for a moment. This empty seat that had waited 300 cycles for someone to fill it. Then he sat down. A ripple passed through the amphitheater. Some species murmured, others went silent. A few shifted in their seats, as if something fundamental had just changed in the room. And it had. The session was called to order by the council's presiding officer, a Salhari elder, so ancient that her translucent skin showed the slow pulse of light beneath it. She introduced the matter at hand, the formal admission of Sol 3 primates to the Galactic Council, subject to standard integration protocols as outlined in the ultimatum delivered to Earth. Ambassador Drisavel stood first. The Vethrani diplomat was imposing, even by the standards of a room full of aliens, tall and silver-scaled, with narrow eyes that reflected light like polished metal. She spoke with the authority of a species that had been the galaxy's dominant military power for over 1,000 cycles. The terms are clear, she said. Every species that joins this council does so under the same conditions. Disarmament protocols, territorial oversight, fleet limitations. These measures exist to ensure stability and prevent any single species from threatening the balance of power. The humans will comply, or they will not be admitted. She sat down. The amphitheater waited. Sam stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture or posture, or try to fill the enormous room with the force of his personality. He simply spoke, clearly and directly, the way a man speaks when he has thought about what he is going to say for a very long time. We did not come here to submit to an ultimatum. We came here because this seat belongs to us, and it has been empty long enough. We have studied your council, your laws, and your history. We respect the purpose of this institution, but we will not disarm, and we will not accept terms that strip us of the ability to defend ourselves. The amphitheater erupted. Hundreds of species reacted at once, some with anger, some with shock, some with sounds and movements that the human translation systems could not interpret. Drisavel rose to her feet, her scales darkening with fury. Behind Sam, Ethan Cole was not watching the angry delegates. He was watching the quiet ones, the small delegations in the upper rows. The species that had been pushed to the margins of council politics for centuries. He noticed something that changed everything. They were not angry. They were afraid. But not of humanity. They were afraid of the Vethrani. Ethan leaned forward and spoke quietly near Sam's ear. The small delegations are terrified, but not of us. Look at how they watch the Vethrani. They are scared of what happens if they speak up. This is not about us. The disarmament protocols are a tool. The Vethrani have been using them to keep weaker species under control for centuries. We are the first ones to say no. Sam processed this in 2 seconds. Then he changed his entire approach. He raised his hand, and the amphitheater gradually quieted. He looked up at the rows of small, silent, frightened delegates, and he spoke to them. I have a question for this council. Not for the Vethrani, not for the great powers, for everyone else. How many of you were forced to disarm when you joined? How many of you lost territory, resources, or sovereignty under the standard terms that you were told were non-negotiable? How many of you sit in this room today with no fleet, no defenses, and no way to refuse when a stronger species tells you what to do? The silence was absolute. 4,000 species held their breath. We built our fleet because we read your history, Sam continued. We saw what happened to the Dolvin, the Cyrethi, the Novari, and dozens of others. We armed ourselves because we knew that in this galaxy, a species without the power to say no has no power at all. If that frightens you, perhaps you should ask yourselves why you never had the courage to do the same. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then a small figure stood up in the upper rows. She was Novari, barely 4 feet tall, with skin the color of blue ash and enormous dark eyes that held the weight of 90 cycles of silence. Her voice was thin and trembling, but it carried across the amphitheater like a bell. The human is correct. We were disarmed when we joined this council. We were promised protection. Instead, we lost our homeworld's orbital defenses, our trade routes, and our voice. We have never recovered. We support Earth's admission on their own terms. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then another delegate stood. A dolphin, heavy and slow-moving, his rough skin scarred from chemical mining. We also support the human position. Then the Aresi. Then the Tinari. Then species whose names Sam did not even know. Standing one by one. Small voices joining together into something that was no longer small at all. Decades of silent resentment. Centuries of quiet suffering. All of it rising to the surface because one species had stood in the middle of the room and said what everyone else had been too afraid to say. Drissa Vel was on her feet, her voice cutting through the noise. Any species that supports this position will face immediate economic sanctions from the Vethrani Dominion. But the coalition kept growing. Even the Kirath shifted. Councillor Yoth, watching from his seat, quietly instructed his delegation to vote in favor of humanity's terms. The vote was called. Humanity was granted full council membership with no disarmament conditions, no territorial oversight, and no fleet limitations. It was the first time in the Council's 12,000-cycle history that a species had been admitted entirely on its own terms. As Sam and his team walked out of the amphitheater, Yoth intercepted them in the corridor. "You planned this," Yoth said. His compound eyes were unreadable. "We planned for every possibility," Sam said. "This was the one we hoped for." "And if the vote had gone the other way? If the Vethrani had won?" Sam paused. He looked at the old insectoid diplomat, and for just a moment the careful mask dropped, and Yoth saw something behind Sam's eyes that was not diplomatic at all. "Then we had other plans," Sam said quietly. He turned and walked away. Katie fell into step beside him. Ethan and Lisa followed. Yoth stood in the corridor and watched them go. 4 humans walking calmly through the heart of a galactic empire that had existed for 12,000 years. And he felt a chill settle deep inside his armored body. He had spent 60 cycles in politics. He had negotiated with warlords, tyrants, and madmen. He had never once felt what he felt now, watching the back of Sam Cortez as he disappeared around a corner. It was not admiration. It was the ancient, primal recognition that he was looking at something the galaxy had never seen before, and he had no idea what it would become. They gave Councillor Yoth the full tour. Sam Cortez and Katie Dunn met the alien delegation at a private landing pad outside Washington, D.C., flanked by a small honor guard in dress uniforms and a translation team that pretended to be necessary even though the Kirath spoke passable English, having learned it from intercepted television broadcasts decades ago. Yoth stepped off his shuttle, towering over every human present, his compound eyes sweeping across the landscape with the careful attention of someone who was cataloging everything he saw. "Welcome to Earth, Counselor," Sam said, extending his hand. "We are glad you came." Yoth looked at the hand for a moment, then reached down with one of his 4 upper limbs and shook it. His grip was surprisingly gentle. "Captain Cortez," he said, "you are smaller than your species' reputation would suggest." Katie, standing just behind Sam, let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "We get that a lot," Sam said. Over the next 3 days, Sam and Katie led Yoth and his staff through a carefully planned tour of Earth. They visited universities where students debated philosophy and engineered robots. They walked through hospitals where doctors treated diseases that would have killed millions a generation ago. They toured farms that fed billions, concert halls that echoed with music, and parks where children played under open skies. Every stop was chosen to present humanity as a curious, creative, and fundamentally peaceful species that simply happened to love building things. It was a beautiful performance, and Yoth saw through every second of it. On the third evening, they sat at a long table beside a lake in upstate New York. The water reflected the last light of the sunset, and the trees were black against the orange sky. The dinner had been excellent. The wine had been carefully selected. The conversation had been polite and completely meaningless, full of pleasantries that said nothing. Yoff set down his glass, his amber eyes fixed on Sam. "Captain Cortez, I have enjoyed your hospitality. Your world is beautiful, and your people are charming. But I did not travel across the galaxy for a vacation." Sam met his gaze without flinching. "What would you like to talk about, counselor?" "The truth. Your species has been watching us for decades. You intercepted our communications. You studied our political systems. You mapped our military positions. And then you built a war fleet that rivals any mid-tier council power, all in less than half a century, all in complete silence. I need to understand why." The table went quiet. Two of Yoth's aides shifted nervously. Tyvos, sitting at the far end, blinked so fast his eyes were almost a blur. Sam took a slow breath. He had prepared for this moment for years, rehearsed it in his head during long nights at the vault, played out every possible version of this conversation. And now that it was here, he decided to do the one thing General Foley had specifically told him not to do. He told the truth. "Because we read your history, counselor. All of it. Every species that joined the council unprepared was absorbed, exploited, or erased. The Dolvan were strip-mined for their biological compounds. Pharmaceutical corporations from 5 different species carved up their homeworld in less than 20 cycles and left them with nothing. The Cyrethi were relocated from the planet they had lived on for 10,000 years because the Council decided to build a hyperspace corridor through their system. They were given replacement territory on a frozen rock that could barely support life. The Novari lost their voting rights after a single diplomatic disagreement with the Vethrani Dominion, and they have never gotten them back." Yoff said nothing. "We were not going to let that happen to us," Sam said. "So we prepared, we built, and we waited." The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. Somewhere across the lake, a bird called out and was answered by another. "Everything you have said is true," Yoth said quietly. "I cannot dispute any of it. But you must understand, Captain, that from the Council's perspective, a species that arms itself in secret is a species that intends to use those arms." "From our perspective," Katie said, speaking for the first time that evening, "a species that demands you give up your weapons before they will talk to you is not interested in talking." Yoth turned his compound eyes toward her. For a long moment, he simply studied her face. Then he made a sound that the translation system did not quite know how to handle. A low clicking in his throat that might have been a laugh, or might have been something sadder. "You are not wrong," he said. The dinner ended shortly after. Nothing was resolved, but something had shifted. A wall had cracked, if only by a fraction. 3 days later, on the Nexus station, the crack became an earthquake. Yoth's classified transmission about humanity's true capabilities had been leaked to the full council. Nobody knew who had done it, though suspicion fell heavily on the Vethrani Intelligence Service, which had a long history of using information as a weapon. 4,000 species now knew that a previously ignored civilization from the outer arm of the galaxy had built a military force that could challenge the established powers, and opinions were sharply divided. The Vethrani Dominion, the galaxy's largest and most aggressive military power, considered humanity a direct and immediate threat. Ambassador Drissa Vel, the Vethrani representative, was a sleek, silver-scaled diplomat with cold eyes and a voice that could fill the amphitheater without amplification. She called an emergency session and demanded a formal vote on humanity's status. This species armed itself in secret, she said, standing at the center of the amphitheater while thousands of delegates watched. It studied us from the shadows, like a predator stalking prey. It built warships instead of reaching out in peace. If we reward this behavior with a seat at our table, we invite a danger that we may never be able to contain. It was persuasive, and a large portion of the council agreed with it. On the other side of the political divide, the Solari remnant, an ancient species that had been declining for millennia, quietly suggested that humanity might make a useful ally. The Kirath Collective declared official neutrality, though Yoth privately told his government that neutrality was no longer a viable position. The vote was called. Should humanity's seat on the council be activated and an invitation sent, or should their unauthorized expansion be declared a violation of galactic sovereignty, opening the door to sanctions, blockades, or worse? The result was a deadlock. No clear majority in either direction. The council did what it always did when it could not make a decision. It formed a committee. The committee decided to send a formal delegation to Earth with an ultimatum. Humanity would be offered council membership, but only if they agreed to standard integration protocols. That meant opening their military records for inspection. It meant accepting limits on fleet size, weapons development, and territorial expansion. It meant allowing council observers on every human colony world. It meant in every way that mattered, handing the keys to their house to a group of strangers who had already proven they could not be trusted with them. The ultimatum was transmitted to Earth on a priority diplomatic channel. General Foley read it in the vault and said nothing for a full minute. Katie read it and laughed out loud. They want us to disarm? After we spent 30 years building a fleet specifically because we knew this was coming? Sam read it more carefully. He read it 3 times. He looked at the language, the structure, the specific clauses and subclauses that had been written by lawyers from species that had been practicing legal manipulation for thousands of years. This is not a negotiation, he said. This is a test. They want to see if we will bend. And if we do? Katie asked. Then we become the Novari, the Dolvan, another species with a seat and no voice. Foley looked at both of them. Then we do not bend. I am authorizing you to attend the formal council session at the Nexus Station. You will be the first humans to set foot in the galactic capital. Take a small team. Dr. Ethan Cole from the Xenolinguistics Department and Commander Lisa Vance as your military escort. Sam nodded. He knew Ethan, a quiet civilian with thick glasses and an almost supernatural ability to read alien body language. And Lisa Vance was the best pilot in the Protectorate, steady under pressure, and sharp enough to see trouble coming before it arrived. "What are our orders?" Sam asked. Foley met his eyes. "Do not start a war, but do not kneel." Sam stood up. Katie stood up beside him. "Understood," Sam said. 3 days later, they boarded the ESV Resolute and set course for the center of the galaxy. Behind them, Earth grew small in the rear windows, a blue dot against the black, fragile and beautiful and worth every risk they were about to take. Ahead of them, 4,000 species waited to decide humanity's fate. Sam sat in his cabin and stared at the stars and thought about what he was going to say when he finally sat down in that empty chair. Counselor Yacht's observation fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the outer boundary of the Sol system, just beyond the frozen rubble of what humans called the Kuiper Belt. There were 5 ships in his formation, all lightly armed, all painted in council diplomatic colors. Yacht stood on the bridge of his flagship, and stared at the long-range scanner display, expecting to see what he always saw when a young species first touched the stars. A handful of clumsy ships, maybe a struggling colony on a nearby moon. The awkward, fumbling first steps of the civilization still learning to walk. What he saw instead stopped him cold. The scanner lit up like a festival display. Hundreds of contacts filled the screen, clustered around planets, moons, and asteroid fields in organized patterns that spoke of planning, purpose, and an industrial capacity that should have taken centuries to build. Defense platforms ringed Mars in layered formations, their weapon signatures bright and unmistakable. The moons of Jupiter were dotted with bases. Saturn's rings had been threaded with mining stations and shipyards that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Earth's own moon glowed with the light of communication arrays and docking towers, a logistics hub that fed the entire system. And those were just the inner defenses. Beyond the Sol system, faint but steady, the scanners picked up human energy signatures in at least 19 other star systems. Colonies, outposts, more shipyards, more fleets. Tyvos, standing at Yoth's side, made a small choking sound. "Counselor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "this is not possible. No species expands this quickly. The Vethrani took 800 cycles to reach this level of development. The Solari took over 1,000, and the humans did it in 40, Yoth said flatly. How? Yoth did not answer, because he did not have an answer. He just stared at the screen and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt afraid. A proximity alarm chimed. 6 human warships had appeared on an intercept course, moving in tight formation at a speed that made Yoth's navigator flinch. They were sleek and angular, built with a design philosophy that prioritized function over beauty, though there was a kind of brutal beauty in how efficiently they moved. Each one was roughly the size of a Kirath cruiser, but their power output was significantly higher. The lead ship opened a communication channel. A human voice filled the bridge, calm and unhurried, with a slow drawl that Yoth's translation system struggled to parse. Unidentified vessels, this is Captain Nate Harlow of the USS Dallant, United Earth Protectorate Navy. You have entered restricted space. Please state your identity and the purpose of your visit. Yoth straightened himself to his full height, which was considerable, and activated his own transmitter. He identified himself as a representative of the Galactic Council of Aligned Species, and requested permission to approach Earth for diplomatic purposes. There was a pause on the other end. Yoth could hear muffled voices, someone laughing, and then Harlow came back on. Copy that, Counselor. We will escort you in. Stay inside the corridor we assign you. Our defense grid is automated, and it does not care about diplomatic credentials. Nothing personal. The escort was efficient and professional. Harlow's ships flanked Yoth's fleet and guided them on a precise path through the system, threading between defense zones and traffic lanes with practiced ease. As they flew, Yoth watched through the observation windows. Human cargo ships hauled raw materials from asteroid mines. Civilian transports carried passengers between planets. Construction drones swarmed around half-finished structures that would become new stations, new docks, new pieces of a civilization that was growing so fast it almost seemed to be feeding on itself. And everywhere, there were warships, patrolling, training, holding position at strategic points. More warships than most Council species maintained in their entire fleets, and these were just the ones assigned to home defense. Yoth sent a classified burst transmission back to the Nexus on a secure channel. It contained only one line. Sol 3 primates are not a fledgling species. Reassess threat classification immediately. He did not know that the humans intercepted and decoded that transmission within 11 minutes. On the ground, Sam Cortez arrived at a secure facility buried inside a mountain in Colorado. People who worked there called it the Vault. It was the headquarters of the Exo-Diplomatic Corps, the branch of the military that had spent 30 years studying the galaxy in secret. Katie Dunn was already there, leaning against a wall in the briefing room, with a cup of bad coffee and the expression of a woman who had been woken up at 4 a.m. for something that had better be worth it. She was 51, lean and sharp-featured, with short auburn hair, and a mind that worked like a high-speed computer wrapped in sarcasm. She had designed half the propulsion systems in the Protectorate fleet, and she had never once let Sam forget it. "You look old," she said when he walked in. "You look awake," he replied. "That is worse." General Aaron Foley entered the room before they could continue. Foley was in his early 60s, with close-cropped silver hair and the posture of a man who had never once slouched in his entire life. He carried a tablet and the weight of roughly a dozen state secrets that would make most people lose sleep permanently. "Sit down," Foley said. "Both of you." They sat. Foley activated a display on the wall that showed a real-time tracking image of Yoth's fleet being escorted through the solar system. 5 alien ships entered our space approximately 4 hours ago. They belong to something called the Galactic Council of Aligned Species. We have known about the Council for over 30 years. Intercepted signals, decoded transmissions, and one captured Vethrani probe gave us everything we needed to understand their political structure, their military capabilities, and their history. And their history told us not to trust them, Katie said. "Correct." Foley set his tablet down. "The Council operates on a system of so-called standard integration. When a new species achieves faster-than-light travel, they are offered a seat and a vote. But the terms of joining include disarmament protocols, trade restrictions, and territorial concessions that effectively make the new species dependent on older, more powerful members. It is not a partnership, it is a leash." Sam leaned forward. "So we built our own house before they could put us in theirs." "That is exactly what we did. For 30 years we expanded, we built, and we kept quiet. No broadcasts, no contact attempts, no signals that would draw attention. We wanted to be ready before they found us." "And now they have found us," Katie said. "Now they have found us," Foley confirmed, "and they are sending a diplomatic team to Earth. We need people to meet them, people who can smile and shake hands and show them our universities and our parks and our hospitals, while making absolutely sure they do not find out exactly how many ships we have, how fast they are, or what they can do." He looked at Sam and Katie. "You two are the only people on this planet who have both deep space combat experience and the diplomatic training to pull this off. Captain Cortez, you will lead the welcoming delegation. Ms. Dunn, you will serve as his advisor and technical expert." Katie raised an eyebrow. "You want me to be polite to aliens?" "I want you to be convincing," Foley said. Sam looked at the display, at the 5 alien ships being guided through humanity's carefully hidden fortress of a solar system, and he felt the old familiar weight settle on his shoulders. The weight of being the person standing between everything he loved and everything that could destroy it. "When do they arrive?" he asked. 18 hours. Sam nodded. 18 hours to prepare for the most important handshake in human history. He had worked with less. "Then we had better get started," he said. Katie finished her coffee, crumpled the cup, and tossed it perfectly into the trash can across the room. "For the record," she said, "I was having a very nice weekend." Somewhere above them, Counselor Yoth's fleet crossed the orbit of Mars and saw the full scale of Earth's defenses for the first time. The old insectoid diplomat sat in silence and watched the human warships glide past his windows like dark, quiet predators. And he wondered, for the first time in his career, if the Council had made a terrible mistake by ignoring this planet for so long. He had come to observe a primitive species. He was beginning to suspect he had walked into the den of something far more dangerous than anything the galaxy had ever seen.